Namaskaram. Today I've been asked to talk about Bhagavan's teachings in general, but particularly with respect to the COVID pandemic that we are all facing. Bhagavan is the perfect spiritual doctor, and like any good doctor, he's not interested in just treating the symptoms. He has found the root cause of all our problems, and the solution he offers is a radical solution, a solution to the very root of all problems. The root of all problems, as identified by Bhagavan, is our rising as ego. Only when we rise as ego do all problems come into existence. In waking and dream, we face so many problems. In sleep, when we don't rise as ego, there are no problems at all. So according to Bhagavan, the ego is the root of all problems, and to solve all problems, the only way to solve all problems is to eradicate this root, ego. Bhagavan's whole teachings are about the eradication of ego. In the very first verse of Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai, he says, Aruṇācala mena ahame nene pava ahateva eradopaya Aruṇācala. That is, you eradicate the ego of those who meditate on you. It can be interpreted in two ways. Ahame, in this context, can mean in the heart. So those who meditate on you in the heart as Aruṇācala. Aham, it can also mean only I. That is, those who think that Aruṇācala is only I. That is, what is shining in the heart of each one of us that is Aruṇācala. And so those who meditate on Aruṇācala as I, you root out their ego. So Bhagavan's teachings are all about eradication of ego. And the means he offered us, that the means he taught us to eradicate the ego, are self-investigation, Atma-vichara, and self-surrender, Atma-samarpanam. In the final, ultimately these two paths are one and the same path. But the preliminary stages, that is, the preliminary stages of surrender need not necessarily entail self-investigation. But in order to surrender ourselves completely, we can do so only by self-investigation. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So Bhagavan's, as I say, Bhagavan revealed to us that the root of all problems is our rising as ego. He summarized this teaching very beautifully in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. I mean, he expressed it in so many ways, in so many places, but in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he expressed it particularly clearly. Ahande undayin anetamundahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahande indrail indru anatam. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahande yabamam. Ego itself is everything. Adalal yadu idu endru enanadale overdal yabam enaor. Therefore, know that investigating what this is, that means what this ego is giving up everything. Why is investigating ego giving up everything? Because, as he said in the previous verse, Tedinal otum pidicum. If we investigate it, if we seek this ego, if we look for what this ego is, it takes flight. Tedinal otum pidicum. It's sought, it takes flight. So, since ego, if we investigate ego will subside and disappear back into its source, which is pure awareness. And since everything else comes into existence only when we rise as ego, when ego is thereby dissolved, everything is given up. So ultimately, self-surrender is complete only when we investigate ourselves keenly enough to know what we actually are. But what does this imply? It implies that in order to investigate ourselves deeply enough, we need to have intense vairagya. That is, we need to have great detachment, so long as we still have desires and attachments for anything other than ourselves, we'll be unwilling to investigate ourselves keenly enough to lose ourselves in our source. This same teaching Bhagavan also gave us in the final paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. He says very succinctly, Than erandal sakalamum erum. That means if oneself rises, everything rises. Here he's using oneself to refer to ego. And in the next sentence he says, Tan adanginal sakalam adangam. If oneself subsides or ceases, everything subsides or ceases. So this is the essence of Bhagavan's teachings. But in practice, most of us don't yet have sufficient bhakti and vairagya. We don't yet have sufficient love to be as we actually are, and thereby to give up all our attachments for other things. So we are all following the path, but not yet reached the goal. So long as we are still following the path, we have to live our life in this world. So Bhagavan's teachings offer us a solution to everything. So how we should conduct ourselves in this world, he summarizes in the final in the next two sentences of this very short final paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. These are the last two sentences. In the first of the last two sentences, he says, Evlo kevlo tandu nadikaromo, avlo kavlo namayundu. That means to whatever extent, tandu means sinking low, subsiding, or it implies being humble or being very submissive, sinking low. To whatever extent sinking low, nadikaromo, we behave or we conduct ourselves, avlo kavlo namayundu. To that extent, there is goodness or benefit or virtue. So for Bhagavan, what is good? Only the subsidence of ego is good. To the extent that ego subsides, to that extent it is good. To that extent it is beneficial for us and beneficial for everyone. Because when we subside, everything subsides. And then in the final sentence he says, Manate adaki kondirandal enge irandalum irakalam. That means if one is the kondirandal gives the sense of continuity. So if one is continuously restraining or curbing or subduing the mind, wherever one may be, one may be. Enge irandalum irakalam. Irakalam can mean one may be, can also be let one be. So wherever one may be, let one be. So that implies whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, we can live happily in those circumstances, provided we keep a constant curb on the mind. And we keep a constant curb on the mind by preventing the rising of ego. So this is Bhagavan's solution to how we should live in this world. So long as we are still following this path, we should be. The more we keep this ego in check, the more we curb the rising of ego, the easier that is. To that extent, it is beneficial. To that extent, we will be able to live in whatever circumstances we may find ourselves in life. But so often in life, we face challenges of so many kinds. One example, it's the nature of embodied existence. The body is imperfect. It's born. It grows up. It's healthy for some years, and then it begins to grow old, and infirmities set in, and old age comes, and eventually we die. That's if we live a full life. Many of us, the life is cut short by disease or by accident or whatever. So life is, even when our life is going well, even when everything seems to be favorable, we know it's all transient. Nothing, however well we may seem to be doing in our outward life, none of this is going to last. It's all going to pass. So life is a challenge for all of us. And life, throws challenges at us in so many different forms. One of the challenges that is facing many, well, all of us potentially, but some people more severely than others, is this coronavirus COVID pandemic. This is creating so many problems for people. Firstly, there's the problem of the fear of getting sick and potentially even dying. It is particularly for older people. There is more danger. So many people are living in fear of getting them. Many people who are elderly or whose health is vulnerable live in fear of this. So there's the fear of the illness itself, but that's not the only effect of it. As we know, throughout the world, there have been lockdowns. The economy has been, in most countries, the economy has been affected. People have been losing their jobs. So it's affecting people's livelihoods. Sometimes when people lose their jobs, their source of income is cut off. They're no longer able to pay their bills or their mortgage or whatever, or the rent or whatever it may be. So people are faced with so many difficulties because of this pandemic. But this is the nature of life. I mean, the world has been relatively lucky, and we've gone nearly 100 years without any major pandemic. Before the last major pandemic was the Spanish flu, which killed millions of people worldwide. It's estimated between 12 and 18 million people in India alone died as a result of the Spanish flu pandemic. And that was at a time when the population of India was only a few 100,000, not more than 1 billion as it is now. So, I mean, but not only India, in all countries, people were very adversely affected. That was the last major pandemic. But before that, there were so many, throughout history, there have been so many pandemics of one sort or another, sometimes on small scale. Now it's globalized because we live in a globalized world. But in the past, there was plague, there were so many diseases. I mean, even during the time Bhagavan was in Tiruvannamalai, there was a cholera epidemic, there was a plague one time. At one time, the whole town was evacuated. And Bhagavan at that time stayed in Pachamankoil on the northeast corner of the hill, which is outside the town. But it was only with special permission that Bhagavan and a few people were allowed to stay there because the whole town had been evacuated. So these things, this is all part of life. I mean, this is not a new thing we are facing now. But we're facing it obviously on a global scale because of global travel. These diseases spread around the world far faster than they ever did in the past. But this is not a new thing. This is nature of life. So how do we face this sort of problem? Bhagavan, as I say, Bhagavan has taught us two means to eradicate ego, or what initially appeared to be two means, but ultimately are found to be one means to eradicate ego. That is self-investigation and self-surrender. When we are faced with challenges in life, what he taught us about self-surrender is particularly applicable. And in this context, it's very useful to bear in mind what Bhagavan taught us in the 13th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. That every paragraph of Nāṉ Ār is a gem, but this is particularly important guidance on following the path of surrender. In the first sentence of this paragraph, Bhagavan gives a definition of what is surrender. And here he clearly indicates that ultimately we can surrender ourselves completely only by self-investigation. What he says in this sentence is, Anma chintane tavira, vera chintane kalambavadku, satram idam kodamal, Atmanishta paranai iripate, tane isanaku alipadam. That means not giving even the slightest room to the rising of any other thought except Atma-chintana. Atma-chintana literally means thought of ourself. but that implies self-attentiveness. So not thinking of anything or not attending to anything other than ourselves, Atmanishta Paranai Iripade, thereby being as Atmanishta Paran. Atmanishta Paran means one who is firmly established as oneself. That means as one actually, as we actually are, as our real nature. That alone is Tanne Isanaku Aripadam. That means that is alone is giving ourselves to God. So ultimately, surrender begins with we begin by trying to surrender our will to the will of God. We try to give up our likes, our dislikes, our desires and attachments. We try to accept whatever happens as the will of God. That's the beginning of surrender, surrendering our will to God. But whose will is it? It is ego's will. And so long as we rise as ego, we can reduce the intensity of our likes, dislikes, desires, and attachment, but we cannot get rid of them entirely without getting rid of ego. Why? Because as Bhagavan says in Bhagavan explains the nature of ego in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. He says, in the last line, he describes ego as Uruvatra Hande. That means the formless phantom ego. So this ego has no form of its own, and it's a phantom, so it's got no substance of its own. As he said in the previous verse, ego is chit-jada granti. That is, it's for not formed by the entanglement of chit, which is pure awareness, sat-chit, which is the only real substance, the vastu or porul. So that is the real substance. So it's a mixture of that real substance and the body, which is jada. That is the ego, as Bhagavan often said, it is the false awareness of ourself as I am this body. That as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body. In that mixed awareness, I am this body, there's the real awareness, I am, and there's the false element, which is the body. The body is jada. It has no awareness of its own. It's as Bhagavan says in verse 22 of Upadēśa Undiyār, the body, which includes all the five sheaves, is all the five sheaves means the physical form, the life, the mind, the intellect, and the will. All these five, they are jadam and asat. They're non-aware, and they are non-existent. They don't actually exist. They only seem to exist. So they are not I, which is satana nanala. They are not I, which is sat, which is what actually exists. So, ego is neither the body nor is it sat chit. It's a false. It's a false entity that rises between the two of these, partaking of the qualities of both. It borrows awareness from sat-chit, and it borrows the limitation of the form of the body from the body. So ego is neither this nor that. So Bhagavan describes it as, in verse 25, as a formless phantom ego. It has no form of its own, because the body is not what it actually is, and it has no substance of its own, because it's not that pure sat-chit. It's just a spurious mixture of the two. So after describing the body as a formless phantom ego, then how does this formless phantom ego come into existence? Bhagavan says, he explains from the beginning of the verse, Urupatri undam, grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri nikum, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri undu mika ongum, grasping and feeding on form, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu urupatram, leaving one form, it grasps another form. Tedinal otum pidicum, if sought, it takes flight. So this is the nature of ego. When ego comes into existence, stands, that is, it endures, and it flourishes by grasping form. So grasping, that patradal, that is the very nature of ego. So long as we rise as ego, we cannot be completely free of desires and attachments, likes and dislikes. We can, as I say, we can reduce the strength of them by the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender, but we cannot be completely free of them until we eradicate ego. So our surrender can be complete only when we eradicate ego. That's why Bhagavan says, but giving not even the slightest room to arising of any thought other than the thought of oneself is giving oneself to God, because it's only by self-investigation that we can eradicate ego. Why is that? Because as Bhagavan often repeatedly said, ego is nothing but a false awareness of ourself. It's an awareness of ourself as something other than what we actually are. So since we so long as we are aware of ourselves as something other than what we actually are, in order to get rid of that false awareness of ourselves, and awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. And we can be aware of ourselves as we actually are only by means of self-investigation. Why is that? Because our real nature is pure awareness. Pure awareness means awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. Because what we actually are, that alone exists. As Bhagavan says in the 7th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, Yatātamai Uḷḷadu Yatātamai Uḷḷadu Atma-vichara. What actually exists is only the real nature of ourself. So since we alone exist, in the view of our real nature, which is pure awareness, there is no other thing. So as long as we are aware of anything other than ourselves, we are aware of ourselves as ego. It's only as ego that we are aware of other things. So as long as we are thinking of anything or attending to anything other than ourselves, we are thereby sustaining our existence as ego. So in order to eradicate ego, we need to withdraw our attention from everything else and focus our attention only on ourselves. As Bhagavan says he said beautifully in verse 16 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Veli videyangale vittu, that leaving external phenomena, manam tan oliuru ordale, mind knowing its own form of light, unme onuchiyam, that is the real awareness. And in Sanskrit, he also says it very beautifully, drishya varitum, that is withdrawing from or leaving aside the drishya, everything that is seen, all phenomena, chittam atmanaha chitva darshanam, the mind seeing its own form of light. Well, in Tamil he says form of light, in Sanskrit he says its own awareness, its own chitva, its own quality of awareness. That is tattva darshanam, that is seeing the reality. So it is only by withdrawing our attention from all other things and focusing our attention solely on ourselves, only on the essential chit aspect of ego, on the essential awareness aspect of ego, but we can thereby eradicate this ego. Because then only when our attention is withdrawn from everything else and focused only on ourselves, then only we're aware of ourselves as pure awareness, which is what we always actually are. And when we are aware of ourselves as we actually are, we can no longer mistake ourselves to be anything other than that. So ego is eradicated only by self-knowledge. That is, ego is avidya. That avidya is eradicated only by vidya, only by the true knowledge of ourselves. So ultimately, the self-surrender can become complete only by means of self-investigation, as Bhagavan implies in this first sentence of the 13th paragraph. Anma chintane tavira, vera chintane kalambavataku, satram idam kodamo, atmanishta paranai irupte, tanne isanaku alipadam. That is, remaining as Atmanishta param, as one firmly establishes oneself, giving not even the slightest room to arising of any thought other than thought of oneself, is giving oneself to God. So in this first sentence, he says we should give no room to the arising of other thoughts. But it seems to us that our thoughts are necessary. We have so many cares and concerns in life. There are so many things we think it's necessary for us to think of. But according to Bhagavan, we need not think of anything. Why? Because we can leave the burden of thinking to God, which is what he implies in the next sentence. Isan peril evelo bharate patalum avalaveum ava vahitu kolkira. That is, however much burden we place on God, he will bear all of it. So even the burden of thinking, we can leave to him. Why is that? Because whatever actions of our body, speech, and mind are necessary, he will make us do those actions. As he said in the first sentence of the note he wrote for his mother, which I'll discuss in a little while, he said, Avarava prarabdha prakaram adakanavan angangiritu artavipan. According to the prarabdha of each one, he who is for that, that's implying God or Guru, who are one and the same, he who is for that, angangiritu, being there, that implies being in the heart of each one, artavipan, will make them dance. So whatever actions our body, speech, and mind need to do, he will make us do. So even the burden of thinking whether we should do this or that, we can leave that burden to him. So however much burden we place on him, he will bear it all. And then in the next sentence he says, sakala karyangalayum or parameshwara shakti nadatu kondira padiya. That is, since one parameshwara shakti means supreme ruling power, or the power of Parameshwara, the Supreme Lord, since that one power, which is God himself. God and his power are not two different things. Shiva and Shakti are one. Since that one power is driving all karyas. Karyas here means everything that ought to happen, needs to happen, or to be done. Everything is being driven by him. So since that is the case, namam adku adangi ramal. Instead of we also yielding to that, ipadēśa undiyār indru sada chintipadiyain, sada chindi patu ain. Why should we be constantly thinking it's necessary to do like this, it's necessary to do like that? That is, so often in life we seem to be faced with dilemma, whether we should act in this way or whether we should act in that way. Bhagavan said we need not even think that. We can just yield ourselves to, without even thinking whether we should act like this or that. If we surrender ourselves to God, he will make us act accordingly. And then in the final sentence of this paragraph, he gives a very beautiful analogy to illustrate what he says in this sentence. Puhe vandi sakala barangalayam tangi kondu povadu terindum. Though we know that the puhe vandi, the steam engine, is that is the train, is carrying all the burdens, adil eri kondu pohum nam, that is, we who are traveling in it, namudea sireya mutteum, adil potu vitu sukha iramal, ade namadu talayil tangi kondu ein kashtapada vendam. That is, why should we who are traveling in that train, which is carrying all the burdens, instead of putting aside our luggage on the train and remaining at ease, sukhamaya ramal, that is, instead of just being happily, traveling happily with our luggage placed, or being happy with our luggage placed aside, ade namade talayil tangi kondu ein kashtapada vendam. Why should we suffer carrying it on our head? So Bhagavan is recommending here that we should surrender all our burdens to God, leave all our burdens in the hands of God, even the burden of thinking. We need not think anything. If we have full trust in Bhagavan, if we believe that Bhagavan is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving, if we all say we believe it, we believe Bhagavan knows everything, Bhagavan is all-powerful, he can do anything, and he's all-loving. So whatever happens is only for good. We know that. We think that at the superficial level of our mind, but we don't act accordingly because we're constantly thinking, ipadēśa undiyār, it's necessary to do this, it's necessary to do that. We're constantly burdening our mind with thoughts, which are unnecessary, because we can leave that entire burden to him. If we leave the burden of thinking to him, he will bear all of it. So we don't have to think of anything except except the Atma-vichara, except clinging to self-attentiveness. Nothing else is necessary. So if we cling firmly to self-attentiveness, giving no room to rising of any other thought, that is surrendering ourselves completely to God. So this Bhagavan has beautifully described the practice of surrender in this paragraph. But as we all know, in practice, as I said earlier, this takes tremendous vairagya. We don't yet have this vairagya, so we are still at the toddling stage. We're like a small child learning to walk. So we struggle. But what Bhagavan tells us here is the more we are able to apply this in practice, the better it will be for us. Because the more we apply this in practice, as he says in the final paragraph, evlo kevlo tandu nadu kiromo, avlo kablo namayundu. To the extent that we behave in a subsided manner, to that extent it is good. So behaving in a subsided manner, or being sinking low, means surrendering ourselves to him. So the more we yield ourselves to him, the easier it will be to face all these difficulties. So how do we apply this to the present situation with this COVID? That is what Bhagavan wrote in the note to his mother is particularly applicable here. I've already talked about the first sentence, in which he says, Avarava prarabdha pakaram adakanavan angangirindu atavipan. According to the prarabdha of each one, he who is for that, God or Guru, will make them act, will make us act. So we can leave all concerned about how the body, speech, and mind should act. We can leave that to him, because he will make us act appropriately. But particularly applicable here is Endrum Naduvad, the next other sentences of this note. Endrum Naduvadadu, enmuichikunum Naduvadu. That is, what will never happen will not happen, whatever effort one makes. So however much, if we want something to happen, if it's not destined to happen, we can try, we can make effort to make it happen, but however much effort we make, it is not going to happen. What is not destined to happen will not happen, however much we try to make it happen, is the implication there. Nāṛpadu entade seinum niladu. What is to happen, or what will happen, will not stop whatever obstruction one does. So however much we try to obstruct what is to happen, it's going to happen. Iduve tinnam. This is certain. Ahalin monamai irake nandru. Therefore, remaining silent is good. Iduve tinnam means this is certain. Therefore, remaining silent is good. So what did this mean? Remaining silent means remaining without the rising of ego. So it's not that we have to remain without acting, because the actions that the body, speech, and mind are destined to do, they'll be made to do. What we need to avoid is acting by our will. The actions that we do by our will are agamya, and they yield fruit which gets stored in sanchita and which later have to be stored, experienced as prarabdha. So long as we rise as ego, and with our likes and dislikes, we're constantly trying to experience things that are not destined to happen and to avoid things that are destined to happen. So we cannot change the course of events at all, but we unnecessarily create problems. Firstly, we are creating fresh fruit, that is fresh karma pala, fruit of action. But not only that, we are not yielding ourselves. And because we are not yielding ourselves, as Bhagavan says, we're carrying our luggage on our head and suffering unnecessarily. So how to apply these teachings to this the present situation? As I say, many people are faced with fear. Am I going to get ill? Well, the truth is, as Bhagavan said, what is going to happen is going to happen. What is not going to happen is not going to happen. If we are destined to catch this COVID, we will catch it. If we are destined to become seriously ill, we'll become seriously ill. If we're destined just to have a mild illness, we'll have a mild illness. Or if we're destined to have long COVID, where the symptoms carry on for months together, it will happen. What is to happen has already been determined. Moreover, whatever has been determined, because as I mentioned earlier, Bhagavan is all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful. So because he's all-knowing, nothing can happen without his knowledge, because he's the ordainer of the fruits of our actions. He's the one who's charted out this prarabdha for us. So it's with his knowledge. And because he's all powerful, nothing is happening, not even Avan Arulal Andri or Anubhamasayadu, except by his grace, not even an atom can move, because he is all powerful. And most important of all, he is omnibenevolent, he's all loving. He loves, because in Bhagavan's view, we are not other than him. We see ourselves as different and Bhagavan is different and all the other people around us as different. In Bhagavan's view, there are no differences because he is aware that he alone exists. So he doesn't see us as other than himself. Therefore, he doesn't love us as other than himself. He loves us as himself. So because he sees us and loves us as himself, he is omnibenevolent. He is all loving. So since he is all knowing, all powerful, and all loving, whatever happens is happening for good. So even if the so-called worst happens, we get seriously ill and we die, that is what is good for us. We may not understand it, but he knows what is best for us. And so if we need to have such complete faith in order to surrender to him, we need to have complete faith in him. We need to believe that he knows what is best for us and does what is best for us. Whatever happens whatever happens is according to our prarabdha. Our prarabdha is ordained by him for our spiritual well-being. Bhagavan is not sometimes our destiny brings suffering in so many different ways. If Bhagavan is all-knowing and all-powerful and all-loving, why does he allow this suffering? Because he takes a long-term view. Bhagavan is not interested in just giving us small pleasures of life or removing small miseries. He has a long-term view. He wants to restore us to our original state, which is a state of infinite happiness, paramasukam. So he's all that he does is with one intention and one intention alone, to restore us to our original state as quickly as possible. So whatever may happen is for our own good. So even if the so-called worst happens, it's worst only in our view. In his view, it's all best. So and as he says, the more we subside, the more we surrender and yield ourselves to him, the less we will be, the less we will be concerned about these things. That is, the more we surrender to him, when we surrender ourselves, along with ourselves, we are surrendering our likes, dislikes, desires, and attachment. So whatever may happen, we accept it as his will. As he says in the second verse of Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai, Ninishtam enishtam, your will is my will. Imbedaku, that is happiness for me. So if we are completely surrendered to him, whatever may happen, it cannot be happening except by his will. So it is happening for our good. So we accept even the worst things, we accept it joyfully, knowing that Bhagavan has given us this. Even the worst calamity in life, we accept as his Aru Prasadam, as the gift of his grace. So this is how this is how Bhagavan wants us to live in this world. That is, we haven't yet surrendered ourselves completely, but to the extent we are able to surrender ourselves, to that extent we'll be able to deal with even the greatest difficulties of life. As he said in the final paragraph, in the final sentence of the final paragraph, Manate adiki kondirandal, enge irandalum irakalam. Enge irandalum means wherever. Enge means wherever, but it can also mean, it implies in whatever circumstances. So if we can continue curbing our mind, that is curbing the rising of ego, wherever we may be, we can be. And how can we curb the rising of ego? Bhagavan has given us a very, very simple means to curb the rising of ego. That is, ego rises by grasping form. So if we try to grasp ourselves, that is the way to curb the rising of ego. In other words, the more we watch ourselves, the more we keep a careful eye on ourselves, a careful, keen attention on ourselves, the more we keep an eye on the ego, the more we curb its rising. And an analogy I sometimes use is, ego is like a young rabbit, a playful young rabbit, but keeps on wanting to come out of its hole to play outside. But outside there are so many dangers. So the nature, that is the nature of ego, that is, if you want to stop a small rabbit from coming out of its hole and facing dangers, what do? You keep a careful eye on the rabbit hole. As soon as it pops up, it sees you and it goes back inside. Likewise, we need to keep a careful watch on our own source, on the source from which we rise. That is on I am, which is the fundamental awareness of our own existence, which is the base, the source from which ego rises. So if we keep a constant watch on ourselves, ego will not, just like the small rabbit, will not come out of the hole so long as it knows it's being watched. This ego will not rise so long as we keep an eye on it. If we allow our attention to go to other things, ego will pop up and start doing all its mischief. So we need to keep a constant eye on ego, just like we keep a constant eye on the rabbit hole to make sure the baby rabbit doesn't come out and get itself into danger. We need to keep a constant attention on ourselves, on our on our fundamental awareness I am. Thereby we curb the rising of ego. So that is what Bhagavan implies when in this final sentence, when he says, Manate adiki kondirandal. If we continue curbing the mind, keeping, that is subduing or restraining the mind. So this is if we follow this, enge irandalum irakalam, whatever circumstances we may find ourselves in, we can live happily, even in the most adverse conditions. Now we are facing a pandemic, but this is not the worst situation. People live through wars and all sorts of terrible calamities happen in life. Whatever calamities it may be, if we surrender ourselves to Bhagavan, if we curb the rising of ego, by curbing the rising of ego, we thereby keep a check on all our likes, dislikes, desires, and attachments. The more we restrain, the more we curb ego, the happier we will be, no matter what circumstances we may be in. So Bhagavan's path is a solution to whatever problem. It is the ultimate solution, because it's the solution that will ultimately eradicate the root of all problems, ego. But even before we eradicate ego completely, to the extent that we follow Bhagavan's path of self-investigation and self-surrender, to that extent we can face any problems of life. So I hope that's an adequate summary of Bhagavan's teachings as applicable to the present problems we face and to all problems of life. So if anyone would like to ask any questions.
Mr. James, I think we have a question in the chat box coming in from Neera Kashyapji. The question is there a transition from self-enquiry to self-surrender, or do they converge at some point?
No, well, I would say we start off with self-surrender. That is, we start off with trying to surrender, not even self-surrender, actually, to be very precise. We start off with surrender. We start by trying to surrender our will. when we go a certain way towards surrendering our will, we find we are not completely able to give up all our, however much we try to surrender our will, we're not completely able to surrender our will. So then we look for a solution, how to surrender our will. That is when God appears in the form of Guru and teaches us the way to ultimately we can surrender ourselves completely. We can surrender our will completely only by surrendering ego, ourself, whose will it is. And the means to surrender ourselves is by self-investigation. So self-surrender leads to and merges in the path of the path of self-investigation. That is, and I would say it in this way: the pinnacle of all spiritual practices is bhakti. The pinnacle of the path of bhakti is surrender, and the pinnacle of the path of surrender is self-investigation. So self-investigation leads to self-surrender, and it culminates and it fructifies, it becomes complete only in self-surrender, and only in self-investigation, sorry. Self-surrender leads to self-investigation and is culminated in self-investigation. So our self-surrender can become complete only when we give not even the slightest room to rising up any thought other than Atma-chintana. That is the culmination of the path of surrender, which is in turn the culmination of the path of bhakti, which is in turn the culmination of all spiritual practices.
Thank you, sir. We have another question in the chat box for you coming in from Sheila Ji. The question is, and I read, Hari Om, the doership, the ego rises even if I do the trivialized work like cutting vegetables, for example. So is the inquiry only when we sit for meditation or reflection?
That is, doership and ego are one and the same thing, because as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body. And as Bhagavan clarified, by body, he means all the five sheaths. That's the physical form, the life, mind, the intellect, and the will. All these five are included in the term body. So, so long as we rise as ego, we experience this bundle of these five sheaths as ourself. So whatever actions are done, I am sitting, I am talking, I am thinking, I am wanting this. All the actions of all these five sheaths are experienced by us as I am doing this. Why? Because these five sheaths are experienced by us. Without these five sheaths, there's no actions at all. So it's doership and ego are synonymous. That is, ego itself is the sense of doership. So whatever actions our body, speech, or mind may be doing, we experience that it is I am doing it. When we're cutting vegetables, I am cutting vegetables. It's not actually we who are cutting vegetables, it's a body that is cutting vegetables. But because we experience that body as I, we feel I am cutting vegetables. So we cannot overcome doership without eradicating ego. As Bhagavan makes very clear in verse 38 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says, verse 38, he says, Vinay modal nam ayin, vile payan tui pom. That is, if we are the doer of actions, we'll experience the resulting fruit. Vinay modal a endru vinavi tanne area. When one knows oneself by investigating who is the doer of action, katrut from poi, but doership will go. Karmam mundrum karalam, all the three karmas will come to an end. Nitama mukti nilay. This is the eternal state, the state of mukti, which is eternal. So the doership will end only when we know ourselves and thereby eradicate ego, because doership and ego are synonymous. Regarding the question, is inquiry done only when we sit for meditation? No. There is not, whatever we may be doing, who is doing it? I am doing it. So I am is there. Whatever actions we may be engaged in, it is I. The I is there. So the difference between self-investigation and not investigating ourselves, when we're not investigating ourselves, we're allowing our attention to go away from ourselves towards other things. When we are practicing self-investigation, we are retaining our attention in and on ourselves. And as Bhagavan says in the 16th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, he defines what is self-investigation. Sada kalamum manate Atma-vichara tan Atma-vichara mendrapaya. That means the name Atma-vichara refers only to the practice of always keeping the mind in or on oneself. So whatever we may be doing, we have a choice, either to allow our attention to go outwards or to retain our attention on ourselves. Even in the midst of activities, we can still be attending to ourselves. In fact, we think it's necessary, oh, I need to attend to this work, then only the work will be done. But according to Bhagavan, whatever work is to be done, it's always, as he says in the 13th paragraph, Sakala Karangalayum or Parameshwara Shakti Nadutu Kondirupadaya. That is, that one Parameshwara Shakti is driving all actions. So whatever actions our body needs to do, it will be made to do by him. Avaraba Prarabdha Prakaram Adakanavan Angangirutu Artivipan. According to the Prarabdha of each one, he who is for that, being there will make them act. So we can keep our attention on ourselves no matter what actions the body, speech, and mind may be doing. It may seem difficult at first because of our sense of doership. So long as the ego is strong, the sense of doership will be strong. And so long as the sense of doership will be strong, we feel Upadēśa Undiyār. It's necessary to do like this, it's necessary to do like that, as he says in that 13th paragraph. Why should we be thinking that? Since he is driving all these things, leave it to him. We don't even have to think of anything. All we need to do is to attend to ourselves. So in the midst of whatever work we may be doing, we should at least be trying little by little to keep our attention on ourselves. We will fail many times, but that is not a problem. Bhagavan says in the 6th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, what does it matter? That however many thoughts arise, so what? Whenever any thought arises, we need to bring our attention back to ourselves. To whom has this thought arisen? To me. Who am I? We need to. That doesn't mean that we have to be questioning ourselves like this. Bhagavan is showing us how we can divert our attention away from the thoughts back towards ourselves. Because whatever thought we may be thinking, who is thinking it? I am thinking it. Who is aware of it? I am aware of it. So who am I? We need to turn our attention back to ourselves. So in the midst of any activity, we can be clinging to self-attentiveness. As I say, it may be difficult at first, but by patient and persistent practice, we will slowly gain skill. As Bhagavan says in that 6th paragraph, Ipidi Paraka Paraka, he says very nicely, Ipidi Paraka Paraka, that means when we practice in this manner, Manataku tan pirupiditil tangi nikkum shakti adikari kindradu. That is the power of the mind to abide in its source, in its pirupidam, its birthplace. That means the pure awareness that we actually are, will increase. So by constantly turning our attention back towards ourselves, we will slowly strengthen our ability to remain firmly in the state of self-attentiveness. So it's by patient and constant practice that we will succeed. When a small child is learning to walk, it has to fall so many times before it gets the hang of it. And even when it begins to get the hang of it, it's still unsteady, it's still toddling and occasionally falling. Likewise on the spiritual path, At first we will fall so many times. It doesn't matter how many times we fall. How many thoughts arise, so what? Whenever we notice our mind has gone out after thoughts, let us bring it back to ourselves. Bhagavan hasn't asked us to succeed in this path. He's asked us to try. If we try, we are doing our bit. He will take care of everything else. As Krishna said in Gita, you have the right to the action, not to the fruit thereof. So we have our only responsibility Bhagavan has given us is to follow the path that he has shown us. He said very beautifully in the 12th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, Kadavalum Guruvum Unmayil Verada. That is, God and Guru in truth are not other. So Bhagavan is both God and Guru. Puli Vayil Patadu Evaru Tirambadu. Just as what has been caught in the jaws of a tiger cannot return, cannot escape, Abvare Guru Vin Arul Pavayil Patavagal Abaral Rakshika Padavare Andri Orukalum Kai Vidapada. Likewise, those who have been caught in the glance of Guru's grace will certainly be protected by him and will never be forsaken. Being caught in the glance of his grace means the fact he's drawn us, he's attracted us to him. The fact that we are drawn to him as Guru means we have been caught in the glance of his grace. So the very fact that we've been attracted to him and his teachings means that we've been caught in his grace. So he assures us we will certainly be protected. Avaral Rakshika Padavare Andri or Ukalam Kai Vidapada. But he will never forsake us. But he adds an important caveat. Eninum Guru Kartiya Varipadi Tavaradu Nadakavendam. However, nevertheless, it is necessary to walk unfailingly in accordance with the path that Guru has shown us. So this is the responsibility that Bhagavan has given us. He has assured us he will certainly save us. But if we don't follow his path, he will still save us, but if we're delaying matters. Until we follow his path, we are just delaying matters. So ultimately, we have to follow the path that he has shown us. So he says that we should follow the path unfailingly. Following the path unfailingly doesn't mean that we never fail in our attempt to be self-attentive. We're constantly failing in our attempt. We should be unfailingly trying. That is, persistently trying. However much we fail, we should not be disheartened. We should get up and try again. Just like a small child learning to walk never gives up. However many times it falls down, it gets up and continues trying. And one day that small child may become an Olympic runner. But even the Olympic runners have to start off, like all of us, struggling to balance and toddling and eventually getting the hang of it. So,
thank you, sir. We have two last questions. I will read them out for the benefit of the devotees. From Neera Kashyapji, the question is, did Bhagavan focus on the practice of meditation as a means of making our day meditative?
Right. Meditation is a term that there's so many things that are described as meditation. The only meditation that Bhagavan actively recommended, if other people doing other types of meditation, he would not discourage people. But the only meditation he actively recommended is what he referred to as Atma-chintana, thought of oneself, or Swarupa Dhyana, meditation on one's own real nature. Both of these are synonyms for meditation on for self-investigation. As he says in the 8th verse of Upadēśa Undiyār, Anya bhavatin avanahamahum ananya bhava mayundipara anetimu utumu mundipara. So rather than meditating on Anya, what is other than ourselves, Avanaham ahum ananya bhavam, that is meditating on what is not other than ourselves, that's meditating on I, with the conviction that he is I, that is anatinam uttamam, that is the best of all. So the meditation that Bhagavan has recommended is meditating on ourselves. yes, if the more we focus on this practice of meditating on ourselves, our whole life will become meditative. That is, the more in the midst of our other activities, we're trying to keep our attention on ourselves, the more the mind will be subsiding and be in a subdued state, and that makes the whole day meditative. So yes, Bhagavan did recommend that we meditate on ourselves as much as possible, and the more we meditate on ourselves, the more ego will subside and remain in that meditative state of just being.
Thank you, sir. The last question of the day we will take up from Parveen Singh ji. The question is, and I quote, "When we surrender ego, humility comes, but the world takes advantage of my humility. What to do?"
Leave it to Bhagavan. Bhagavan has asked you to be humble, asked you to subside. If the world takes advantage of you, that's his will. If he wants to protect you from the world taking advantage of you, he will protect you. So our only concern is to follow the path shown by Bhagavan. However, I'll just say one thing. What humility doesn't mean just an outward show of humility. Humility means the inward subsidence of ego. When ego is subsiding inwardly, sometimes in certain circumstances, it may be appropriate to act in a certain way. For example, even Bhagavan sometimes got angry. When just a small example, when he saw people hitting the branches of the mango tree, just outside his hall, there were some mango trees. Those mango trees have been there even before the ashram came there. The people used to hit the mango tree, the branch of mango trees, to bring down the mangoes. The reason was they feared if they don't bring down the mangoes before they ripen, the monkeys will come and eat them all. Bhagavan said, the monkeys were here before us. We have come and occupied their place, and we now say they're stealing our mangoes. We are stealing their mangoes. And so when people hit the branches of a tree, Bhagavan got very angry. And he said, see, this tree is giving us nice fruit. And what thanks we give in return? We beat it. We beat it with sticks to try and bring down the fruit even before they're ready to fall down. So in certain circumstances, even Bhagavan got angry. So there may be circumstances in life where it is, as Bhagavan said, Bhagavan translated some verses from Yoga Vasishtha, there in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. That is, O hero, O Rama, play your part in this world, having known all that is to be known and having understood the truth of everything. Play your Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, that is, play your role in the world. Whatever. Rama was a king, so he had to act as a king. When Ravana came and stole his wife, he didn't say, okay, I surrender my wife to you. He had, as a king, as a husband, he has a duty to go and protect his wife. So likewise, we have a certain dharma in outward dharma. Our real dharma, as Bhagavan said, our swadharma is to be as we actually are. But outwardly, our body and mind have a certain dharma. If we are a husband, father, mother, daughter, son, whatever, we have certain obligations to our husband or wife, to our parents, to our children. We have obligations, so we have to act accordingly. But we need not be concerned about this, because if we are focusing on surrender, whatever actions our body, speech, and mind are destined to do, they will be made to do. That is, avarava prarabdha prakaram adakanavan angangiranduata vipan. Not only our own karya, our own actions he's making, or sakala karyangali, or parameshwara shakti, nadiku kondir padiyal. So he is making everything happen as it should happen. So if it is good for you for people to take advantage of your humility, he will allow that to happen. He will make that happen. But if it is good in certain circumstances for you to for you to behave in a certain way to resist to stop people taking advantage of you, he will make you act accordingly. So what is your concern? Your concern, Bhagavan has given us just one duty, that is to surrender to him. He will take care of everything else. How your body, speech, and mind should act is already determined by your prarabdha. That is, we can avoid doing the actions by agamya. That's action. We can avoid doing agamya. That's the actions we do by our will. By surrendering, we avoid those actions. But the actions that the body, speech, and mind are destined to do, they will be made to do come what may. So we need not be concerned about actions at all. Ipadi vendum, apadi vendum, ain sada chintipadein. Why should we be suffering by constantly thinking like this? So our only duty is to surrender to Bhagavan. Whether the world takes advantage of our humility or not, that is in his hands. Leave it to him.